So let's just launch right. Stalin! This is the most important dude from the last half millennia, not because of who he was or what he did, but because of who he scared. Us. We were so terrified that we were going to have to face down the Red Army on the plains of Europe at the end of the war that we changed how everything would work because we knew we needed allies, not to stand behind us or shoulder to shoulder with us, but to stand in front of us to suck up ammo. And since the Europeans had just been through the toughest war in human history, volunteers for that sort of job were in short supply. So we had to bribe them. We had to change the way the world worked so that they would want to serve in that role. And so what we did was we sent out our Navy to patrol the global oceans, the only Navy that had survived the war, so that anyone could safely go anywhere at any time, interface with any market, any community, without having to have a military escort. In exchange, you would join the Cold War. Now, a lot of people call this different things. The Bretton Woods system, I call it the American-led order. You all know it as globalization. It has always been a security ploy by the United States to fight an enemy. But then World War II turned into the Cold War, turned into the end of the Cold War. And in 1992, the strategic justification for this system went away. And the Americans had never invested their economy in it because it was a strategic ploy. So we started down a spiral of ever more internally focused, narcissistic, populist political contests that brought in a series of leaders that bit by bit backed away from the system, culminating with the last two. From an international economic point of view, the two most similar presidents we have ever had are Joe Biden and Donald Trump. The big difference between the two, Trump tweeted out policy, Biden takes those tweets, runs them through a grammar checker, and puts them into the bureaucracy so they outlast him. The two most economically populist leaders we have ever had, and it's a strongly bipartisan push. This is net worth by age bracket, and it's a familiar story. You get older, you get better at your job, maybe you take a new job, maybe you start a business, your net worth goes up. But the real magic in North America begins at age 50, because that is the year where, on average in the United States and Canada, your single biggest expense of your life, your youngest child, becomes someone else's problem. And the money you save by being an empty nester, you use to pay down what is typically your second biggest expense, which is your homestead. And on average, by 55, that is paid down as well. So from 55 to 65, the 10 years before your retirement, your income's the highest it will ever be, your expenses are under control. That delta is 70% of global private capital. That is literally where the money is. And then you turn 65, and you retire, and you liquidate. Because if there's a currency crash or a market crash, you no longer have the income to recover. You'll be destitute. You'll have to live with the kids. And for those baby boomers out there, I think you know that your kids are the millennials, and living together was a one-way experience from their point of view. Don't count on that. So this is normal. It's been like this for literally centuries. Until Stalin. Because Stalin's effect changed the way we live. What Stalin did by helping the United States push towards globalization is we suddenly didn't just allow any business to go anywhere, any person could interface in that way as well. And if you started to take services jobs and manufacturing jobs, you weren't living on the farm anymore. And that changed the entire financial and consumption model of the human race. So this is the demographic profile for the Koreans at the dawn of the globalized period in the 50s. You got children on the bottom, young adults, mature adults, retirees on one side, men on one side, women on the other. It's this pyramid because of simple mortality. This is primarily a country-based agricultural demographic. We're all living on farms. And when you live on farms, kids are free labor. You have as many of them as you can put up with, plus one. It's the only way to find out what's too many. But they're free labor, that's the whole point. This sort of model has some very specific economic and financial characteristics. There aren't a lot of people aged 55 to 65, so it's a capital poor environment. You have a lot of people under age 40. They're either kids or they're people who are having kids and building homes. The need for credit is huge, so the cost of credit is high. but it's growth-driven because of all that consumption. But there's not much of a tax base. Low value add, high inflation. But with Stalin and globalization, we all moved from the farms into the cities, and in the cities, kids are no longer free labor. They're a free source of migraines. So we had fewer of them, and here's the Koreans now. Radically different model. Suddenly, you're awash with that capital-rich demographic of people in their late 50s and early 60s. But you've run out of young people. So capital is cheap, the tax base is amazing, government receipts are high, government services and infrastructure are great, technology is everywhere. But there's no longer enough people at the bottom to consume. And countering that is a workforce that has literally decades of expertise that is very productive. The whole world has gone through some version of this transition, at different speeds from different starting points, but we're all on the same highway here. And the Koreans, in the next few years, will lead us into something new. A world where that bulge in the population isn't young or isn't mature, it's retired. And we will have to figure out a fundamentally new economic model that is not based on consumption, on production, or on investment. What will that be? Not a clue. Never happened in human history before. We're making this up as we go. And the Koreans aren't alone. Bottom left, there are the Germans. Same basic model for the same basic reasons. This is their last decade as an industrialized power. They won't have a workforce. Now, for those of you who like Beamers, I suggest you get one now, because Germany, in the way we think of it, won't be there in 6 years. Now, the United States there at the top left, we're a little bit different. We're a little bit more of a chimney. A couple things that are different about our system. Number one, we never bet our economy on globalization. It was a bribe. If we had bet our system into it, we would have just been another occupying empire and there would have been no takers. So we industrialized more slowly and our birth rate dropped more slowly. Second, a lot of elbow room in the United States. Cost of living is cheaper. That meant we didn't go from farm to city when we did industrialize. We went from farm to small town to suburb to city. And those 2 extra steps bought us a lot more time. So have our birth rates dropped? Absolutely. Not nearly as fast or as far as everyone else. If we keep aging at today's rate, we will be in a Korean-German style situation around 2070. That's a lot of time to figure out another path. Top right, Mexico. You'll notice that it's a perfect pyramid until you hit about the 35-year-olds, and then it goes straight down. What happened 35 years ago? NAFTA. The Mexicans looked at what was on offer after World War II, like, wow, this sounds a lot like an American security plan. We want nothing to do with that. It wasn't until the W. Bush administration that the Cold War ended, the Mexicans were like, well, I guess this is the only game in town. Sign us up, we'll do NAFTA. As soon as they did that, urbanization started, birth rate has now dropped by 60%. If they keep aging at their current rate, they will be in a Korean-German style problem around 2080. They're just barely behind us in that process. But what this means is that since the birth rate has dropped off, net migration from Mexico to the United States has now been flat to negative for 14 straight years. It'll probably never be positive again. They've run out of young people. Most of the folks crossing the border in the South are Central Americans. But 10 years after NAFTA, we got something called CAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Agreement, and the Central American demography looks just like Mexico's with a 10-year delay. So regardless of what you think of Democrats or Republicans or the border or immigration or workforce, know that the situation at the southern border is going to look radically different in just a few years because the Central Americans are running out of people to send to. And then we have the Chinese. Now, this is already one of the 5 fastest aging workforces in the historical record. This is data from June of last year, which the Chinese have now said is wrong. In July, they updated it. They're now asserting in official statistics that the drop in the birth rate from 2017 until now has been worse than what happened to the Jews of Europe during the Holocaust. And this is still wrong. The Chinese Academy of Sciences, whose jobs it is to interpret the statistics that the government puts out, says that this overcounts the Chinese population by over 100 million people, with all of the missing millions, folks who would have been born since the one-child policy was adopted 40 years ago, meaning that all of the missing millions are under 40, suggesting that these yellow bars don't even exist. There's nothing in the historical record that compares to this. Not in war, not in peace, not in plague, nothing. And this isn't even the low-case scenario anymore. There are some Chinese demographers, several of which are under house arrest now, who say that the real missing millions number is closer to 300 million. This is not survivable, period. China will cease to exist as a unified industrialized nation state within 10 years. That's the best case scenario now.